Good afternoon. Today is September the 24th. Yes, September the 24th. We are, as you notice, quickly getting through this chapter, and I'm anticipating we're going to have a test on Monday. Yeah, Monday. And so Monday, because I think we'll finish this unit either, well, today or early tomorrow. And so, yeah, Monday. So prepare yourselves accordingly. Okay. What we're talking about today, of course, we begin with the relationship between England and Spain that deteriorated all during the 16th century and eventually would lead up into this thing called the defeat of the Spanish Armada. And basically, and it's a really critical and important naval battle because it really does change the game. After the Spanish Armada, England will become the world's number one sea power, a title that they will hold on to until 1942. That's right, during World War II, when they'll be surpassed by the United States Navy. Anyway, so England and Spain began then during the 16th century, began a chess match which would eventually end in the decline of Spain as the world's greatest superpower of the day. I mean, literally, Spain owned the 16th century, well, until 1588, and for a while afterwards. And they owned it because Columbus had tripped over the New World, and within a few years, once again, the Spanish were shipping silver by the ton, literally. I mean, so much silver was being shipped that what the Spanish had to do, they would send their galleons to the Americas, and then, ships have to have ballast. The ballast for the purpose of making sure the ship, which has sails, does not tip over in the water. And the way they would achieve that during this day, they would load the bottom of the ship with stones, lots and lots of stones. And the Spanish, in order to increase their payload on their return trip back to Europe, would take those stones out of the lower chambers of the ship and then replace the stones with silver. And yeah, it was quite effective. Fact of the matter was that tactic or that methodology was used a lot in the colonial days. In fact, if you've ever been to the old cities of the Eastern Seaboard, and I mean Boston, parts of Philadelphia, Savannah, Georgia, a lot of the seaboard cities, and they have old towns that are still preserved, you'll see that a lot of those old towns have the cobblestone streets. And you say, well, this is interesting. Why do they have cobblestone streets? Well, what they were doing, they wanted to pack the ships that were going to Europe, so much so that they, again, took all the rocks out of the bottom of the ships coming from Europe, and then they had nothing to do with it. And so you had these big giant piles of rocks piling up along the shoreline, and somebody got the bright idea of, hey, since every time it rains, our streets turn into mud holes, why don't we just take those rocks, put them in the street, and apply a, moderate amount of concrete or mortar or filler in between the rocks, and there, voila, you have a very stable street, as opposed to every time it rains, the street, turns into a mud hole, which was quite common in both Europe, not only Europe, but also, of course, in the American frontier. A lot of the streets of the early towns were just a mess, literally. Anyway, so the Spanish had, because of the amount of silver the Spanish were collecting from the New World, and gold to a lesser extent, but silver was the big thing. Spain became quite rich, and with that with that profit, The Spanish financed, this tremendously large navy, and also a lot of other things, like King Philip II built for himself the Escorial Palace, which was this beautiful, extravagant palace. And also, Philip II, a Habsburg, Philip II spent lots of money on artworks. Um, and it's kind of an interesting thing. Philip was a Habsburg, okay? The Habsburgs ruled Spain and Austria. And one of the things about the Habsburgs was that uh, all of them, there was this dominant trait, physical trait that the Habsburgs had. Their chin. Their chin looked like a shovel. I mean, literally. If you ever seen the old Pittsburgh Steeler coach, he's on CBS Sports in the football season. He's a commentator now, but he has this. They call him the chin. He has this. Well, that's the Habsburgs have the same thing. So did their women, and I mean, it was an extended chin, and these paintings, you have to remember, um, one of the things that paintings of royal families were used for was not to just record for posterity. These paintings that were created were also kind of like the Match.com of their day. I'm not kidding. You see, when various ruling families of principalities, countries, and things like that wanted to solidify friendships, relationships with other countries, one of the best ways to do it was to marry the offspring, marry the children. And of course, since it was impractical, dating wasn't a thing. And what they would do is they would send these pictures. Of course, a painting is not a photograph. A photograph sees something, takes a picture, and it's a fairly accurate representation normally. Well, these paintings, they could cheat a little. And so, yeah, with the Habsburg family, I imagine they cheated quite a bit. Although, even if you look at even if you look at Habsburg paintings, you will find, give me a sec, see if I can find it. It was in, there is a painting that I had from the Chicago, Cincinnati, yes. Cincinnati Art Museum. Now, come on now, I have that. Königsberg, Cincinnati. Well, I could have swore I had that. Maybe it's in Chicago. Give me a sec. Don't be making fun of me. Chicago. Oh, but I swore that was a Cincinnati painting. Give me a sec. Don't be making fun of me. Well, I am just mortified because I had a portrait of the one of the Habsburgs. If any of you see it, just cry out, will you? Well, this is embarrassing. Nearly as humiliating as a Habsburg, or maybe it was in the Kansas City. I'm humiliated, guys. I thought I had it. Anyway, you're getting a short preview of my art collection. And I'll have to show you one day. Well, forgive me. I'll send it some other day. But yeah, as a Habsburg, one of the Habsburg families, and it showed his. This guy had a chin. Well, sorry guys. Come on, right there. All right. So, anyway, Lady Jane Grey had succeeded um, Catherine of Aragon for 8 days. She was a distant relative of Henry VIII, and she was a child. She was like 12 or 13 years old. She was on the throne for 8 days, but because she was not a direct descendant of Henry VIII, she was removed and beheaded. Kings and queens during this time, in favor of Mary, the daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon. Okay. Mary married Philip II of Spain for political reasons. During her reign, Mary I, later called Bloody Mary, had all Protestant enactments repealed. Yes. And she was called Bloody Mary, and I can't believe I didn't have this already. Give me a sec. Go to Mr. YouTube. Yesterday, I got busted. I was busted because they accused me of copyright infringement. Let's see. Yes. That's not it. Yes, here we go. And
by order of their gracious majesties, Queen Mary and King Philip, we are come to.
you do notice once again one thing he referred to uh, Queen Mary of England and King Philip. Notice that and this is pretty realistic scene. Look at the crowd here. The crowd is just pressing forward. And notice they have been tied to the stake, and this is a concrete stake. That means that people being burned at stake is a fairly regular occurrence. Now, for burnings at the stake, there were two ways of doing it. And by the way, this is kind of a rough scene to watch. So anyone who is a little bit squeamish, please, you can fast forward through this and it'll be all done. That's one of the cool things about this. But yeah, notice that the sticks and the wood are placed around here. There were two ways of burning people at the stake during this time. One, of course, was to place the wood literally right there so that the person would be consumed by the flames. The other was to place the wood pretty much about where the people are standing so that the person involved wouldn't burn so much as bake. And both were used. By the way, this is also the way witches were burned as heretics. And so, yeah.
To witness the burning of these Protestant heretics.
See, Protestant heretics. Notice the use of the word heretics. A person who has taught or gone against the rulings of the Catholic Church.
Denied the authority of the one true Catholic Church.
Say it once again. Remember where we are here. Henry VIII changed all of England over to the Anglican faith. And for a while, all the Catholics were being chased down and burned. Then Mary, the daughter of Henry VIII, the first daughter, the only daughter of the marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, who had spent her life being embarrassed because her mother got kicked out, and she spent her life in a convent, one of the least exciting places that you could live. She was quite bitter about this thing. And so when she became queen, she said, I'm going to get some payback. And that meant, I mean, think of it. That meant that, Henry VIII, if you were a good Catholic, then you got this happen to you. But then when his daughter Mary took over, and you weren't a good Catholic, if you were a good Protestant, then this happened. And in the end, Elizabeth I is going to come along, and she's not Catholic, but she's a politique, sorry. And she kind of like says, haven't we burned enough people? So why don't we just not? And that, even though, to be fair to my Catholic friends, and I have many, even though Roman Catholicism was technically outlawed in England, fact of the matter is, when the English took over Ireland under Oliver Cromwell, the practice of Roman Catholicism, as in having mass, was a capital crime, meaning that if you did it, you could get burned at the stake. Until 1832, it wasn't so prosecuted. It wasn't so prosecuted as much as it had been. But anyway, this is a Roman Catholic bishop here, and he's basically making sure Master Nicholas Ridley, who happens to be an authority in the Anglican Church, gets his.
And of His Holiness the Pope.
So their crime is they denied the Catholic Church and the power of the Pope.
Let them burn for all eternity in the flames of hell.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, it's amazing. I mean, remember that guy, he's a bishop. He's an agent of God, and here he is. Not only are they going to be physically burned, but he says, after you're burned, now you're going to burn in hell forever and ever. Nice people.
God bless you, Master Ridley. Oh God, friends, help me.
Anyway, see two shocking things here. Number one, they brought children to these things. And it just shows how, what kind of human beings we are. And I mean we, because, we might not think of doing that today, hopefully, but I mean, goodness, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and as late as the 1950s, it was not uncommon for African Americans to be strung up in the South, and they would bring their kids to watch. And so they just focus on that. And notice this guy is saying, somebody help me. I fear I burn too slowly. Yeah, I mean, the man, it was said that when you're burning, you can actually begin to feel your organs harden. And so he's asking for help. Let's see if he gets any. So they're out there asking for help, and notice a little smile here. I mean, people are just. Look, help. It's help. They're helping. They're bringing more firewood. Now, of course, you guys know this is CGI, right? Okay, don't panic. Okay, very good. And we stop. All right. Like I said, you can open your eyes now for those of you who are having difficulty. And I'm not making fun of you. There are people who can't. I my poor Spanish wife gets freaked out of that kind of thing. Okay, so where am I? Yes, let's find this. Not that. Yeah, there we are. So, but anyway, yeah. So she became known as Bloody Mary. During her reign, Mary I, later called Bloody Mary, had all Protestant enactments repealed. In other words, all of those Protestant laws that had been passed by Henry VIII, although actually Henry VIII didn't make many real changes, doctrinal changes in the church, but his son, Edward IV, well, actually, his son, who was a child, Edward IV, actually did. She had them all repealed. Several prominent Protestants, John Hooper, Hugh Latimer, and Thomas Cranmer, were executed, kind of like what you just saw. They were joined by several hundred Protestants who were either beheaded or burned at the stake as heretics. Mary died and was replaced by her half-sister. Mary, once again, though, remember, she married Philip II. Philip II, who, if you've watched that Spanish Armada clip, it's that guy, the King of Spain. Mary had married Philip II, then, and she thought she was expecting for some reason. She had a growth, only the growth was a tumor. And she died of that tumor and was replaced by her half-sister, the daughter of the beheaded Anne Boleyn. My spelling is terrible. Look at that. Who writes that? Who writes that? Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I. Anne Boleyn, William Cecil was her shrewd political advisor. And when it says shrewd, he was, very smart. He basically told her to avoid problems, to, instead of taking Catholicism head on, instead of going right out and becoming an enemy of Catholicism, instead of choosing sides, to play the middle. The New Anglican Church did not allow extremism. Good choice. Extremism invites bad things. The 39 articles that were published under Elizabeth I were a statement of Protestant principles, and England became a bastion of moderate Protestantism. Tolerant. Well, no, not quite tolerance. The Netherlands was more tolerant than England, but England was still, more tolerant. When Elizabeth came to the throne, however, the majority of England was Catholic. When Elizabeth came to the throne, she had just an entire plethora, big word, plethora, means a lot of problems. Number one, she had an empty treasury. Number two, there was a full-blown rebellion going on in Scotland against her rule. Number three, there was more than one plot out there to kill her. And you just go on from there. She had no army. England will have no standing army for quite some time. The Navy had to be built from scratch. And then there were the Spanish. But the problem that she had to deal with first, as you see there in Part E, was how to deal with extremism amongst both the Protestants and the Catholics. Because there were lots of people in England who wanted to either take revenge for something done to them or to act out against what they thought was a false religion. Elizabeth was a true, there's that word again. I wonder if that's going to be on your test. What do you think? Politique. She put political ends over religious concerns. In other words, the things, whatever she must have felt in her soul, she set that aside for the purposes of staying in power, for the purposes of what was good for the country. She was truly cautious with the Puritans, and the Puritans We're going to learn about them a bit. Who were the Puritans? Do you remember when you were like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old, and Thanksgiving rolled around, and every Thanksgiving you have a little Thanksgiving pageant where you dress up as either Native Americans or yes, we called them the Pilgrims. And everybody was happy and sat down and they shared the dinner together and were thankful. Um, okay, fanatical. How is that not misspelled? No. Most fanatical of all the. Anyway, um, and how everybody got along together. Well, those guys, the Pilgrims, with the black hats and you they are the Puritans. Now, that still didn't tell you who they are. One American writer, his name was Cotton Mather, you don't have to remember that, described the Puritans thusly. A Puritan's worst nightmare, he said, was that somewhere, somebody was having fun. Now let that sink in for a minute. Was that somewhere somebody was having fun. And we're going to learn more about these Puritans as we go on. For example, Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan. He will rule England for, I think, 11 years. And they call it the Cromwellian period, the no fun period. But we'll get back to that. You see, Puritans were really strange people, very, very, very strict. You might recall the Salem witch trials of the 17th century, where 16 women and one man were hung as witches. That was the Puritans did that. They were very, very strict about personal behavior. They were definitely the no fun league. For example, Puritans, the Puritans, as you know, were the Pilgrims. They originally went to Boston, Massachusetts, or what we now call Boston, Massachusetts, the Plymouth colony. I actually visited. I visited around the turn of the millennium. We journeyed up to Maine and we stopped. We stayed overnight in Plymouth, and we actually went aboard the Mayflower II, which was a ship built to scale, which I mean is very interesting. One of the most interesting things about ships like that, the Mayflower, the three ships that Columbus sailed across the ocean, one of the first thing that strikes you about the ships like that, they're small. I mean, there are people that own personal boats that down on Lake Cumberland that are bigger than the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria, and about the same size as the Mayflower. They are really small, and to go across that great Atlantic open ocean in those things. And so, yeah, we saw that, and there were some very poor, underpaid actors who were trying to make you believe that they, lived on the Mayflower, and that was fine. And then we saw Plymouth Rock. Now, Plymouth Rock, yeah. There is a thing, Plymouth Rock. And what is it? It is a rock about the size of my desk here, which is about 4.5 feet long by about 2.5 feet wide. And on the rock, it has carved into it 1620. And I remember going and looking at it and thinking that the only thing that could have been sadder and less disappointing than what I was looking at would have been if I'd had to pay for it, pay to see it. That would have made me mad. But yeah. And so getting back to the Puritans, yeah. So the Puritans, when they moved to the New England area, set up a civilization, a city based on their religion, very, very strict religion. Um, and for example, the Puritans, and they profess Christianity, but trust me, they weren't nice people. The Puritans actually murdered a lot of Native Americans, and I mean murdered. They actually set up a meeting with other Indian chiefs, with these surrounding Indian chiefs, and actually they had weapons hidden in the house where they were going to meet. And when they all sat down, they pulled the weapons out and just slaughtered them. Yeah, so it wasn't they weren't it wasn't like they were they're pious, nice people. But yeah, Puritans, here's the thing, bear baiting. Puritans opposed bear baiting. Now you're saying, Mr. Horton, what is bear baiting? Well, and we'll talk about this later. Bear baiting is a sport. And it was a sport that was enjoyed in colonial America and in Europe until they ran out of bears. And in bear baiting, what they do is they take a bear, obviously, and they chain one of its hind legs to a post so it can't get away. And they put a muzzle over its mouth. And then they set dogs on it. And they watch. Now, the Puritans opposed bear baiting and said, oh, of course, that's so terrible. It's such a cruel sport. They opposed bear baiting not because it was cruel to the bear or the dogs that the bear killed, because, still talking about a bear. He still has claws. They opposed bear baiting, outlawed bear baiting, because the people who watched it liked it. And so when we're talking about these Puritans, and this is not the last time we're going to talk about them, that's who they are. Yeah, that's who they are. Although it is worth saying that the Puritans in England started the first public education system in this country. It was for the purpose so that their children could read the Bible. The Puritans got their start here in England, Elizabeth's England. They didn't like Elizabeth because she wasn't strict enough. They then moved to the Netherlands, and they didn't like the Netherlands because the Netherlands, who tolerated all religions, they didn't think that was strict enough, and their children were not speaking English anymore, and so that's when they all got the idea and put the money together to go and across the pond and settle in Massachusetts. So, getting back to the matter at hand. Yeah. The most extreme Puritans came to be known as congregationalists. Elizabeth had fewer Catholics executed in her long reign than her half-sister Mary I had Protestants executed in her shortened Catholic reign. Although I have had arguments over that very thing with some of my Catholic friends. They don't like Elizabeth. Neither Philip II of Spain nor Elizabeth wanted a confrontation between their two states, between England and Spain, but forces were at work that was going to make this inevitable. For one thing, Elizabeth had been excommunicated for heresy in 1570 by Pope Pius V, and that put England on Spain's naughty list because Philip II was not a politic. Philip II felt like he, as a monarch, should do what the Roman Catholic Church said. For example, the defeat of the Ottoman Turks at the Battle of Lepanto. He thought that was some kind of a religious crusade. And now you have these English heretics, and he thought it was his duty to take down Elizabeth, especially since she wouldn't marry him. Yeah, I mean, he did. He tried to get her to marry him. You do remember he was married to her sister, though, right? Right. Anyway, and England had signed a mutual defense pact with France. That's strike two against the English. And then there was the matter that the English supported privately Privateers. Please tell me you know what a privateer is. A privateer, as you know, is a pirate. Actually, not quite. Privateers are pirates who work under what is called under a letter of marque and reprisal. And excuse me, privateers, they actually have a letter of marque and reprisal. It gives them legal authority to rob, murder, rape, and pillage. For as long as they rob, murder, rape, and pillage the other guys. So, like John Hawkins and Sir Francis Drake, I hope you took time to notice the picture of Sir Francis Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, that I took in London on my favorite vacation in 2013. Yeah, and Sir Francis Drake. A couple of things worth noting. Please note, number one, yeah, he was a pirate. He began his career as so many noteworthy people during this time. He began his career as a slave trader. It was lucrative. But yeah, he began his career as a slave trader, got into piracy, and when he signed a letter of marque and reprisal with the English, one of the things he did was he actually sailed his ship, the Golden Hind, around Cape Horn, which goes around the tip of South America. And he came up on the Spanish who were harvesting silver from the Andes Mountain. He snatched a bunch of their ships loaded with silver. And since he knew he couldn't go back the same way he came, he actually became the first English person to circumnavigate the globe. Only unlike Ferdinand Magellan, he actually survived the trip. Yeah, one day we'd have to talk. Ferdinand Magellan's trip predates well, no, it doesn't really. Ferdinand Magellan, his voyage finished in 1521. Yeah, that's an interesting voyage that we'll talk about a little bit later on. So anyway, yeah, he actually circumnavigated the globe, and then there came this Battle of the Spanish Armada. Um, we'll get to that. After the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre that we talked about, where 30,000 Huguenots were slaughtered in France, Elizabeth and England were the only protectors of Protestantism in France and the Netherlands. In other words, yeah, England was the big protector of Protestantism. So, how much time do we have? How much do we have left? Why don't we end here? And we'll pick up tomorrow. That'll be Friday. And we'll finish on Friday. And that means our test will be Monday. Okay? N'est-ce pas? Verstehen Sie das? Comprende? Forgive me, right there. Right there. Right there. And